Welcome to week one of Safety and Society. Here's an overview of our course goals. Our journey over the next 16 weeks will primarily be learning about risk and how to be a better consumer of risks. We're going to explain what risk consumption is, how you get it from the news, society, and even your upbringing affects how you look at risk and how you consume it. We'll learn a little bit about the history of safety profession and how risks in the early 1900s, late 1800s bled in together to create the safety profession. So what do we worry about? In society, over 300 million people are in the United States. 6,700 die every day. Now, why are they dying? That's what we want to look at. Is it illness? Is it accidents? Is it job related? Is it home related? What risks are they taking that are leading to their deaths? Another question is, what do you worry about? And that's what I want to know. So for your first forum, real simple, I want you to list the 5 possible causes of death that concern you the most. I'll compile them all together. I'll discuss them in next week's video. I just want to know what you're concerned with, you personally, what you think would be the most 5 likely causes of your death. So remember that everything we do has a risk associated to it. It may be a small risk or a large risk, but there's always a risk. So in talking about that, we'll move on to what is currently killing us. So all these statistics come from the CDC, which is the Center for Disease Control, and these are from 2018. So here's the 10 leading causes of death in the United States in 2016. Now, you notice that I said these stats come from 2018. That's because most government agencies are behind 1 to 2 years on publishing their statistics. So these statistics are from 2018, but are actually the top 10 causes of death from 2016. Now, if you look at these 2 charts, males, females, ignore other for now. It is one of the largest sectors, but the top 2 for both males and females are heart disease and cancer. These are health related. Can you change that? Can you prevent that? What risk do you take now as a young person that will lead to heart disease or cancer in the future? Both of these are long-term diseases. So what you do now may not be seen for 10, 15, 20, even 30 years. That is the risk of what you do now. Now, if you look at the other category, it's a large percentage of the causes of death. Inside the other category is mainly accidents. So you have vehicular accidents, you have home accidents, you have industrial accidents. That all falls under the other category. So here's your top 10 or your top 15 list. Again, heart disease and cancer are at the top. And then your third one, accidents, unintentional injuries. These are things that, again, people don't mean. You don't leave your house meaning to die or meaning to kill someone else. So these are all unintentional. And as we get into the semester, you'll see how big a role that vehicular fatalities play into that. So what's not in the top 15? Assault or homicide is 16th. It moved down from the 15th in 2010, but it's still a major issue for certain age groups, mainly the age groups between 15 and 30. HIV was a large issue in the mid to late 80s, early 90s. It has since declined. So you say, well, how has it declined? Well, HIV was a huge risk to the world's population. There was no cure, there's no money, there was no research, and there was no time put into it until the world came together. The World Health Organization, the CDC, America, and European governing bodies came together, saw it as a risk to all populations, not just Africa or the homosexual population as the early myths about HIV claimed. And so what they did is they started pouring money and resources and time into the disease and into research. And now you have a risk of dying from HIV has been dramatically reduced because you have medicines that now prevent it. You have safe sex education, and you have a treatment process that if you do contract it, that is a preventative from it spreading farther. So risk can be abated if the world can see it as a big enough issue or risk to everybody that we need to put time, money, and resources into it. And a lot you'll see is with cancer. In the late 80s, cancer was also just beginning to be a big problem, but there wasn't a lot of money for cancer research. Now, cancer is one of the most highly researched diseases, and as we all know, there are many, many types of cancer, and each one has its own research. So we've seen it as a risk. We've put the time, we put money, we put resources into it, and we are attempting to cure cancer um, in the near future. So 11 years ago, in 2018, again, heart disease, cancer, top of the list. You see accidents are down here in fifth place. So in 10 years, accidents have actually increased to be the third leading cause of deaths. So here's the death rate over 60-year trends. So what we're looking at is this is a logarithmic scale. Um, so everything has been um, standardized to logarithmic, so everything's on an equal playing field. And as you can see, from the scale starts in 1958 and goes to 2016. And you look at the top line, the top two lines actually, is heart disease and malignant neoplasms, which is cancer. And you can see that as the years have gone by, there's actually a downward trend of people dying for those. And that's what we want to see in society. We want to see trends going down of how people are dying, because that means society evolves, we find a problem, and we solve it. Now, if you look all the way down here at Alzheimer's has dramatically increased. So you look at it and you say, well, now Alzheimer's disease, it wasn't a problem in the 80s, maybe not big of a problem in the 90s, but as you get to 2000, it's starting to increase its way up there, and it's actually number 6 on the death trends. If you watch the news and you pay attention to commercials now, there's a lot of push for Alzheimer's research and to find a way to either combat the onset of the disease, or when the disease has been diagnosed, to provide medicines that prevent the deterioration of a person. Let's focus on accidents real quick. So, as you can see, 1958 all the way to 2016, that we had a drop in trends, but it's right back up to the normal thing. So accidents or unintentional injuries, especially in the workplace, is the focus of the safety profession. We need to um, focus on reduction of work-related accidents and illnesses, and hopefully the idea of the profession is that this would trend downward in the next 10, 20 years to where we become a zero accident facility, or a zero um, tolerance for accidents within a workplace. You're never going to get down to zero risk. There will always be risk. But with the safety profession, we go in there, we identify what the hazards are, we identify the exposures, which we'll learn about a little bit later, and we reduce the risk to minimal, and then put things into place to prevent accidents. So here's your death rates from accidents. So we're going to focus on the top line. Um, if you look at it from where it begins to where it is today, obviously all accidents have been reduced dramatically over the years. If you look at some of these peaks and valleys in the 1920s here, and we'll get into a little bit of the history, you had some high deaths and then you had a low deaths. This is the beginning of workers' rights, and some would also say the beginning of the union, which aren't with you that are not familiar with the unions are all about protecting workers' rights, getting them better working conditions, and everything within the workplace. Whether you're pro-union or anti-union, that doesn't matter in this class. We're going to talk about the what it is and what it does for the safety profession. As you move into the 1940s, you have what was known as World War II, and most of the male population left the United States to fight in World War II, meaning that the women and children, because again in the 1940s we didn't have child labor laws yet, so women and children entered the factories. So you have an increase of accidents around the population, just because you have a lot of unfamiliar people doing jobs that the male population would have been doing as they took off to fight in World War II. After the 40s, you had a good downslide up until about the 1970s, and that's located right about here. The 1970s actually saw the birth of OSHA under Richard Nixon, and this spike in um, deaths, accidental deaths, is a key component to the birth of OSHA. You have OSHA, you have the EPA coming about in the 70s, and then as you see, we go in a downward slide, and then we're starting to trend back upwards now. If you look at the work one, which is the red one down here at the bottom, uh, you see that it's a downward slide for accidents in the workplace, and that's great. Your home accidents, again, downward slide, they're trending upward now. So people are being less safe in their homes than they are actually at the work. So my question to you is, take a moment to think about it, is why are more people safe at work than they are in their own home? So as we move forward here, safety and risk go together, hand in hand. Uh, Safety is there to mitigate risk, and we'll talk about the definitions here. So safety has many, many definitions, and it depends on what context you're talking about. So if you look at a couple of these, a locking or cutoff device that prevents a gun from being accidentally fired. So in firearm safety, they're built with internal safeties, so the gun cannot be accidentally fired or discharged while sitting there. Um, you look at in football, an act or play in which a player on the offensive team is tackled in his own end zone or the ball is down there. That's 2 points. That's a safety. But you also have the position player on the defense of a safety, and he is the one that plays farthest back and gets to see the entire field and fill in gaps as needed. So we'll look at these top two here. The state of being safe, freedom from occurrence of risk, injury, danger, or loss. Security, the quality of averting or not causing injury, danger, or loss. So this is actually Webster's Dictionary of Safety. So let's break this down a little bit more. You have your assumptions of risk is the pure safety is a myth. You can never be 100% free for danger, which is correct. Risk is more appropriate measure, and risk can be quantified. So we go back. Safety, in that definition here, is a state of being safe. You're free from danger, and you have acceptable risks. So I asked the question of how many of you drive. Most of you should be between the ages of 16 and 25. And if you don't drive, you will, hopefully, eventually in your life. But do you consider yourself a safe driver? So here's the injury rates for motor traffic, vehicle traffic is what we're focused on. But these are by age. So as you look at this, which you would think is correct, this blue line is falls. So as you get older in age, falls become more of um, a higher percentage resulting in death as you age. But motor vehicle traffic, if you look at the ages between 16 and 25, that's the highest rate per age group. So even though you think you may be a safe driver, your age group actually contains the highest death rate for motor vehicle traffic. So if your conditions of being safe equals a freedom from danger, and automatic automobile accidents are the number one killer of your age group, are you willing to give up driving in order to be free from danger? Of course, you're not going to. So, we'll ask the question of: do you think Webster's definition of safety is realistic? And it's not. So, freedom from danger is near impossibility. There's always risk. There's always danger. It's inherent. Other situations increase that risk, such as that if you join the service and you go out to a war zone or to a country that's unfriendly, your risk of being in danger has increased tenfold. The same can be said if you're visiting a big city such as New York or Chicago for the first time. You've never been there and you don't know anywhere. The dangers of those cities increase because of your unfamiliarity. However, if you're from Chicago and you're visiting on the weekends, those dangers are still there, but because of your familiarity with the area and you know where to go and where not to go, your risk is reduced. So, what is safety? So, the American Society of Safety Professionals is one of the oldest safety professional organizations in the world. And their definition is that the control of recognized hazards to achieve an acceptable level of risk is what safety is. This definition is more accurate. Uh, it's realistic. We cannot be free from danger at all times, but if we can reduce exposure to hazards within an acceptable level of risk, we can be safe in our home or workplace. Now, acceptable level of risk, it's both what, if you work for an employer, they identify what is the acceptable level of risk. However, an acceptable level of risk in your home could differ dramatically. And it's all based on your personal feelings of what activity you're doing, how risky you feel it is, and can you accomplish it. Uh, some of the things that we talk about under safety are credibility and conceivability. And these are two different concepts. And I'll give you an example. Uh, it's conceivable that the city of Bloomington um, could be destroyed by an asteroid. However, the credibility that an asteroid uh, would destroy the city is very low. Yes, if an asteroid did hit the city of Bloomington, it's probably going to be destroyed. But what's the probability that that's going to happen? So you can asteroid proof your home and make sure that if an asteroid did hit the city, you would be the sole surviving structure. But you would dump a lot of money and resources into that. And again, what's the probability that it's going to happen? Whereas falling down the stairs is a higher probability, and it is conceivable that you could die from it. However, you're more than likely going to be injured than die. So when it comes to credibility and conceivability, we need to understand is, can it happen? Yes, it's conceivable. Will it happen? That's how credible it is. So, when is a system or activity considered safe? A thing is safe if risks are judged to be acceptable. Again, this comes back to what is your level of risk acceptance. If you are skydiving and there's two companies you can choose from and you don't know anything about them, but as you go to the airport to take off, you notice that one plane looks to be in disrepair, potentially leaking something foreign on the ground, and the other plane for the other company is brand new. It looks pristine. The pilot is in a clean uniform and ready to take off, whereas the broken down plane, you don't really see a pilot. You see one mechanic working on something, you know, but you want to skydive. Skydiving is risky. Are you going to increase your risk by choosing the company that has a plane that may not be in the best of shape? Or are you going to potentially decrease the risk by taking the plane that looks to be in good repair and everything seems to be in order? So that's where you're judging what's acceptable for you in your own personal risk. So what is a continued? It's only safe. Uh, it's a system or activity is only safe to the degree that risks are acceptable. We just spoke about this. When do we accept risks? Well, we accept risks when we don't know they're there. So it's a default. If you don't know something is risky, you're accepting that risk upon yourself. When the risk is insignificantly low. If you've identified an activity and you say, I'm going to go ride go-karts. I put a helmet on, I put gloves on, I put my seatbelt on, and the motors or the engine's regulated to only 40 miles per hour. The risk of you being injured in that is low, and you're taking it upon yourself and saying, with these safety measures in place, I accept this risk. Or when we're worth it. Higher risk um, has higher rewards in the business sense. But if we look at the picture on the left, uh, that's from the Challenger explosion. NASA accepted the risk of a known part that was potentially faulty, and the result was a nationally televised tragedy. The Challenger space shuttle exploded. They did an investigation, and they did find that there was a faulty part on it. However, the risk of NASA postponing that shuttle flight was great due to the publicity around it. The money had already been put into the shuttle. They were in a weather window that may have potentially postponed it for at least another 6 months. So they took the risk, and in this situation, the outcome was tragedy, and the risk was not worth it. However, if you think about risk financially, if you take a risk in the stock market and you bet on a company and you know it's risky and they do succeed, your reward is greater than if you take a lower risk company such as an IBM or Apple that's been around and you know they're stable. Um, you're putting much less money into risk that way. So we talk about safe. So how safe is safe? Is 99% sure? Is it good enough? Well, that's 5,000 incorrect surgical procedures per week. It's 2 or more accidents each day at a major airport. It's 15 minutes of unsafe drinking water each day. And it's 7 hours a month without electricity. Is that good enough for you? So we talk about, well, how about 99.99%? Again, that's as you get into this risk decision making, which is the next lecture, you take all this information in and you make the decision on, is this an acceptable risk for me to take? Safe is a subjective term to the individual. Your safe is not the same as my safe. And a best example of this that I can give is parenting. As you grew up, your parents parented different than your neighbor's parents. Maybe they let them do something that you didn't because the answer was, well, that's unsafe. Think of it in that way of how what safe is. If you would let your child do it, it's safe enough for you. But that may not mean somebody else's child can do the same activity because that parent doesn't feel it's safe enough. So let's move on to risk. So risks in the home. I like this this little graphic here. It gives some key points here. But you look at the highest risk. You're 1 in 10,000. You have a risk of being struck by lightning. And if a 1 in 100,000, you have a risk from one light year a day for 1 year of cancer. But if you think about it, what is talked about more? Is it cancer or being struck by lightning? If you look at the media and the news outlets have a way of spinning risk to be much more detrimental to your health than it actually is. So, risk of injury, danger, or loss. That comes from that definition from Webster's. What is risk? Well, first we'll talk about the types of risk. So there's many different types of risk. There's financial risk, there's business risk, there's personal risk, professional risk, institutional, industry. Your personal risk, it's you driving to class. It's you making, choosing to do an assignment or not. You're risking what grade you'll get. These are all, there's risk in anything you want to do. The textbook definition of risk is risk equals the future's uncertainty. We're going to define it as a mathematical problem. So risk is an expression of the combined severity and probability of loss. So your elements of risk that help break this down is your probability, is how likely it will happen. Your consequences are how bad it can be, or consequences is the same as severity. The hazard is what is the potential source of harm, and the exposure is who and how many does it affect. So your probability, how likely it'll happen, and your severity, how bad could it happen. If you take those two numerical values and you multiply them together, and you can get a value for risk. And again, we'll talk more about how that's calculated later. So in the safety profession, we look at hazards and exposures first. Without an exposure to worker, is there still a risk? Well, that's a yes and no question. So risk will never leaves, but there can be no risk of an injury. So if I have a set of rollers on a conveyor belt, and the hazard is an employee being pulled underneath the rollers. Well, the exposure is there. My employees have to work next to these rollers to move whatever product through them to flatten it out. So what is the probability? I don't know. How close are their hands to the rollers? How close are they actually working in proximity? Well, what's the severity? Well, again, what's the size of the rollers? Are these huge rollers rolling out steel that if somebody would get pulled underneath them and they could die? Or are they smaller rollers that are just moving parts along a conveyor belt where they could get their hand caught and maybe potentially break? You'd have to judge the severity. But if I take a guard and I put it in front of the rollers, and now an employee cannot get their hand inside of it, or they are no longer near it, I have reduced or eliminated the exposure, and I've reduced the risk. The hazard is still there because the guard could be taken off, but I have reduced the risk of my employee being injured or potentially dying. So there's three sciences of risk: toxicology, epidemiology, and statistical analysis. Um, Toxicology is the study of nature and effect of poisons. Epidemiology is the study of diseases in human populations. And statistical analysis is looking for clues within large sets of health statistics, death rates, all those things. We look for trends. Watch the videos within week one. They'll give you a better understanding of both toxicology and epidemiology. And we're going to discuss this statistics in detail next week. So, this lecture has covered mortality statistics. We talked about what worries us. We covered our basic safety and risk terminology, and we introduced elements in science, the sciences of risk, all of which are important going forward this semester. And we've come to the end of our first lecture of the first week. Ensure that you're completing the readings, which is chapter 1 in the textbook, and the 2 articles that I have posted on ReggieNet. Watch the videos on epidemiology and toxicology. They're short videos, about 4 minutes each, but they'll give you a better understanding of what epidemiology and toxicology is, and I think you can be able to tie that to this class and why it's important to us. Make sure that you have completed assignment 1. Hopefully you did it before this lecture. And then complete Forum 1.1 and 1.2.